And I think most of you know that our main presenter tonight is Jackie James, and she has been running these programs so well, and we are so pleased that she has taken these programs and shaped them in a way that makes them very unique and creates a better than what we had expected from the curriculum that was presented to us. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Jackie, and she will introduce what's going to happen tonight.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this third session of this, what we're calling the Date with Death Club. I'm so glad to see such a great group here tonight, and thank all of you for being here. I do see that we have quite a few new people, and I'd like to welcome all of you, especially those of you who are here for the first time. I think we really do have an action-packed session for tonight. Since we are such a large group, again, I'm going to dispense with individual introductions, but I'd like to ask all of you to make sure that you have your name on your screen and along with your program pronouns, if you could do that. As Lillian mentioned, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers for this session. It's really going to be an information-packed session. We welcome Senator Brownsberger, our representative, our church member, our neighbor, our friend. We also welcome Judy Kugel, who is author of several books on aging and the author of a recent blog about her husband's arduous death experience. We're also grateful to have both of them, and I happen to know that they're eager to hear from you what your questions are as well. Thank you, Sam. And thank you, Sam, for providing tech support again tonight. I appreciate that. For those of you who are new, we can go to the second slide. For those of you who are new to this Date with Death Club idea, I'll just say a little bit more about it. Again, it was based on a curriculum that was developed by a UU minister, Dr. Karen Johnson, and Lillian and Susan Kobayashi founded and talked to me about joining with them in providing a few sessions from this curriculum. I'm grateful to Lillian and Susan for their support. The purpose of the program is to help us confront our own mortality in a way that is not morbid as a community. Our hope is that doing so can add what we say life to years, meaningful life to the years that we have left. So in the first session, we worked on getting comfortable talking about death in a way that isn't morbid and challenging negative attitudes about aging. In the last session, we worked a lot in groups to discuss both our fears about death and to come up with ideas for lessening those fears. Tonight, we want to continue on that path, increasing our comfort with death talk again. And based on some of the ideas that we heard in the last session, think about options for owning our dying. This is what I'm calling it. This is options for owning your own dying, which include discussion of legal options for hastening death and the current impetus for making medical aid in dying legal. So let's get right to it. I took that list of fears that we created last week and summarized them here on the left side of this slide. All of them, in one way or another, have something to do with the fear of losing control over when, where, and how the end comes, especially the fear of living too long, and that the process of dying taking a long time and suffering. And on the other side of the slide, we can see the ideas that many in this group generated last time for lessening those fears, mostly, again, by actually trying to gain some measure of control. So the ability to have symptoms well managed and control over the manner of death and getting our ducks in a row and feeling that we're ready to let go. So tonight we want to take those ideas for lessening our fears further by exploring what choices are available to us at the end of life, even while knowing that we don't always have a choice. And I want to stop here and acknowledge tonight that I know there are strong opinions and strong feelings on this topic, and I know that we don't all agree. So what I'm trying to do tonight is make sure that you are informed with facts, regardless of your opinion or feeling about these matters. So let's move to the discussion of legal options to hasten death. All of these options have been affirmed by the US Supreme Court. The right of a competent individual to refuse medical therapies, and that includes stopping eating and drinking. So I think we all know that we can refuse treatment when people receive a fatal diagnosis. Some people would rather let the disease play out, especially if the treatment is worse than the disease. We also can stop treatment, perhaps when people are undergoing treatment and the disease continues to progress. This is a choice when the treatment itself is experienced as unbearable, or the patient has just become weary of the whole process and is ready to let go. Sometimes hospice is engaged at this point. Another option we have has to do with one of the fears we listed at this last time, and that is the fear of a painful death. And to lessen this fear, when all means of reducing pain have been exhausted and there's no relief, there is the option of what's called palliative sedation. It's also called terminal sedation. And the sedation provides enough medication to keep the patient comfortable, quiet, and free of pain. And usually at this stage, all nutrition and hydration is stopped. The final way to be discussed here is to voluntarily stop eating and drinking. It's referred to as VSED. And this means to refuse all foods and liquids, even feeding tubes, with the understanding that doing so will hasten death. This is an option for people with terminal or life-limiting disease who feel that with this process, their dying will not be prolonged unnecessarily. And one of the advantages of this decision is that patients can change their mind at any point and resume eating and drinking if that's what they want to do. The VSED choice is also commonly accepted in the medical community, but it does take thoughtful planning ahead of time. It takes the involvement of a primary care physician. It involves conversations with family members and caregivers who might accompany someone who's going through this process. And it involves getting a clear and completed advance directive. On the other side of this slide, you can see there's a story of a woman who developed Alzheimer's and did a lot of homework about how she wanted her disease to go and how she wanted her end to be, and did choose to voluntarily stop eating and drinking. So it's nice to have that story on the slide, but tonight we have someone with us who's been through this experience recently with her husband. Judy Kugel is here to tell her story. Judy wrote a poignant opinion piece in the Globe about her experience with her husband's choice to stop eating and drinking. And in the piece, she argues that legalized medical aid in dying would have given him a far more merciful death. I read the piece in the paper without knowing Judy, and soon learned that she was a friend of my friend, Louise Bray. And I'm grateful to Louise for introducing us to Judy. So Judy, thank you so much for being with us tonight and being willing to share your story. Judy will have about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a chance for Q&A for about 5 minutes after you speak. As Lillian mentioned, if you all have questions during her talk or shortly after, please put them in the chat, and that way we will relay the questions to the speaker. So Judy, please take it away.
First, hi, everybody. I want to thank Jackie for inviting me to share my story, which I think is really, really important. My husband, Peter, chose to stop eating and drinking to end his life, but it was a long process to get to that place. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2008, or well, he thought he began to develop symptoms in 2008. And the first thing happened when we were walking down the street in New York City, and my husband, Peter, was in front of me, and my son, Seth, was with me. And Seth turned to me and said, "When did Dad start shuffling?" And that was the first indication of what would be a very long journey. Parkinson's disease is a slow disease to take you, it slowly takes away your abilities to do one thing and another. But anyway, he did, later that summer, he began to encounter a lot of fatigue. And he went to see some physicians, and nobody could explain why he was so tired. He was still functioning fine. I mean, he was at, many of you are familiar with the Harvard Institute Learning Retirement. He was teaching there, and he had a lot of friends there. And one afternoon, he went on a bike ride with some of them, and they got off to have lunch. And one of the people on the ride, who was a doctor, said, "Peter, do you mind if I tell you something that might make you uncomfortable?" And Peter said, "Sure." And the doctor told him that he thought he could tell from the way that he walked that he was suffering from Parkinson's disease, which was amazing because so many doctors had tried to help figure out what was wrong with him. So, you know, that's how we all got started for many years. That was in 2008. For many years, he was able to keep up with most of the things that he wanted to do. He still was teaching at the Harvard Institute for Learning Retirement. He still was able to ride his bike. He still was able to make me laugh. We just had a lot of fun together. And then finally, as things began to get worse, and he began to feel like he didn't really have control of his life anymore. And at a neurologist appointment in September of 2021, he was unable to remember at the end of the session the 3 words that neurologists always tell you at the beginning to see if you were still able to, you know, think as you should. And that was the first time. And somehow that just told him that he wasn't ready to continue to deteriorate, and he wanted to be in charge. He wanted to be able to end his life in the way that he wanted to end it, while he still was able to control it. And that's what he did. On a Sunday night in early October, we had a great dinner. He was very appreciative of my cooking, and he said, "Oh, this was great. It was a new recipe." And everything was fine. And in the morning at 6 o'clock, I went to give him his pills, and he said, "I'm done. I'm just not going to eat or drink anymore. I want to go on my own terms." And that was hard. I forgot to mention that when he first started talking about this, our children and I persuaded him to wait at least a month to see if he was really happy to stay with that decision. But anyway, he did, but he didn't give me any warning that he was going to do this. And so it was hard for me, as it is always hard for the caretaker, to follow through with what he wanted, but we had all agreed that he could make that decision while he was able to do that. So what followed was very painful. For a couple of days, he was pretty much able to still communicate. It's just heartbreaking I mean, we were together for 56 years, and they were great years, and it was just heartbreaking for me. The children, we have 2 sons, and they both came home. And you probably all know that one of the last the last sense to go is your sense of hearing. And so I skipped over the fact that we eventually had hospice come, and they were wonderful. They brought us a hospital bed, and he was in a room where he was comfortable. And but my children and I decided that even though he wasn't communicating with us anymore, he could probably still hear us. And so he loved Mozart, and so we played Mozart CDs all day long, one after the other. I love Mozart, but I can't listen to his music for still, it's a year and a half later, and I can't really listen. And we also read to him again, because the hearing is the last thing to go. And I recalled, I said this in the article in the paper, that at one point he said to me, please, can I have some limonada, which is a drink that he loves. And I said, you can't, you've made a decision to stop eating, and it's just going to prolong everything if I give it to you. And then I just swabbed his mouth with some liquid, some water on a cotton swab. And I left the room and just wept, because to not be able to give the person you love for so long one little thing that he's asking for, but when he's going to leave you soon, was just heartbreaking. I'm saying all this because it shouldn't have to be that way. I think it's pretty obvious. But eventually, 8 days later, or around 6 or 7 days later, my kids and I were like, please, God, take him, because this is just terrible. And at that point, we had to have 24-hour care because he was restless at night, and it was just a nightmare. It was just the worst. The Globe called it the excruciating 8 days of my life. And so I had just vowed that I was going to do everything I could to make other people who wanted to do this, make it possible for them to do it. I'm not advocating for this, but I am advocating for the right to make this decision for yourself. There's really so much I could say, but I think I'd like to close by, one of the things about Peter was that he was a computer scientist, and he was a professor at Boston College for many, many years. And he lived in his mind, and he had a degree in philosophy. And so he wrote all the time, and he thought all the time, and his fingers weren't doing a very good job on the computer anymore. And so I said to him, he seemed frustrated. I said, honey, why don't you just write about how you are feeling at this stage in your life? And he wrote something. The typing was very bad, but I could make out what it was. And I'd like to close by reading that to you, if you'll just give me a few moments. These are Peter's words. I'm planning to end my life. I've entered hospice, and in a few days, I'll stop eating and drinking. Why? I'm happy with much of my life. I have a wonderful wife, 2 accomplished sons, and 2 lovable grandsons. Judy and I have been happily married for more than half a century. We live in a condo that overlooks the Charles River. We can walk to Harvard Yard, where I sat in on classes, or more recently Zoomed in. But my advancing Parkinson's disease and a stroke-impaired left leg are limiting my mobility. You have to have lost your mobility to appreciate what that means. When I gave up my driver's license, I couldn't go many places alone. Now I must call for help to go to the bathroom. Excuse me, it's another page. I am not in pain, but being helpless hurts. I realize that dying may be uncomfortable, but it won't be as bad for me as it was for my mother's parents who died in Auschwitz. When I think about the trouble I'm having at the tail end of my life, I worry that Judy may have some trouble in her golden years without my help. That may be largely in my imagination. Not having my help may be an advantage. I'm sorry I'll be missing half of my children's lives and most of my grandchildren's lives. I think I'm making the right choice, but if I haven't, I won't have to live with it. So that could have been a lot easier for Peter and for those of us who loved him so much. And that's why I want to make this opportunity available for people who want to take advantage of it. So thanks for listening.
We thank you, Judy, for sharing that very important and emotional experience with us. We all know that this is an emotional topic, as well as one that can challenge our own ethics and beliefs. And I think it's important to be reminded how important it is to demonstrate respect for all the perspectives here, and to honor each person who has the right to make their own choices. Please continue to put your questions in the chat. Are there questions, Lillian? What I see in the chat is people being grateful to you, Judy.
Right. There are no questions.
Thank you, Judy.
Okay. Thank you all for listening.
So I'm wondering if any of you have known someone who has accessed a form of death with dignity or medical aid in dying? Could I just see a show of hands? Actually, I can't see hands.
You'd have to, yeah, you have to put it in gallery view.
I just stopped the share in case that helps. I can share it then.
All right. All right, well, I'm gonna move on. Given Judy's story, could I have the next slide, Sam? Given Judy's story, we move now to talk about the possibility of legal medical aid in dying and where that legislation stands in Massachusetts. And these are some of the terms we hear when people are talking about it. You might be familiar with medical aid in dying, but there's many others, such as death with dignity, assisted dying, assisted death, aid in dying, and so on, physician aid in dying. The curriculum that we're using recommends that we not use the terms like assisted suicide or euthanasia. And here I'm quoting from the author. Physician-assisted suicide, or PAS, is an inaccurate, inappropriate, and biased phrase opponents often use to scare people about death with dignity laws. Suicide is politicized language deployed with the intent of reducing support for the issue. It implies a value judgment and carries with it a social stigma. And euthanasia is another word that refers to the painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease or an irreversible coma. The practice is not legal in most countries. So the author of this curriculum says that medical aid in dying is not euthanasia because the patient self-administers, the doctor does not. So to continue this discussion, I know we're all waiting to hear from Senator Brownsberger. As many of you know, Will is a member of our church and one who represents many of us in this topsy-turvy political environment that we're all living in. He's also a friend to many of us. When I was teaching aging and public policy at Boston College, Will came to my class each year when this discussion of death with dignity was the topic. And I will tell you that the students loved him and felt so lucky to be able to interact with a real life senator. And you can imagine how difficult this was, given that we were teaching this class in a Catholic university. But I got my best course evaluations when he came. So tonight I want to welcome him and invite him to help us understand more about this legislation having to do with medical aid in dying. He will speak for about 15 minutes and then we will have again a chance for questions and answers. Please do put them in the chat as you think of them, and there will be a time afterward that we will wait for questions as well.
So thank you, Jackie. And I really think this is a great group to accept death as part of life, you know, however one plans to choose to end it is so important to recognize we all are going to die. So if we can be honest about that and honest with ourselves about that and live life better as a result of our honesty about that, then that's a beautiful thing. Both of my parents, when I was a young man, watched them take care of their parents. Both of their, I guess all of my grandparents had some extended period of disability and discomfort. And, I watched my parents take care of them. And first of all, I developed a commitment that I would do the same for them. But they also, I think it really impressed them that they wanted to go out on their own terms, to die with dignity, to not experience a long period of disability or discomfort. As it happened, my mother did develop Parkinson's disease, but she then also developed pancreatic cancer. So she did not have a long decline. And my father died shortly after she did in his sleep. So they didn't have to face those issues. But the most important thing to say about this, and this is a really important distinction to draw, is that the legal framework of medical aid in dying has nothing to do with that kind of long-term decline. It doesn't have to do with a decision that I have a poor quality of life and I don't want to live anymore. It's incredibly important to underline that what's at stake legally in the legislation that is before the legislature, it's only for people who have a very short-term lease on life. They are terminally ill. They might be having a great time, or they might be having a miserable time. That's not one of the criteria for being eligible for this. The criteria are that you are an adult, you're mentally capable, you're Massachusetts resident, and you are terminally ill, meaning that you are expected, not only by your own attending physician, but by a consulting physician, to die within 6 months. And the bill creates a very elaborate process to make sure that a person is, in fact, it's really known that they have only 6 months to live. It's been multiply validated. They are very informed. They must be informed. They know not only their diagnosis and their prognosis and how it's all going to go, and if they if they choose to have a prescription that would allow them to die on their own, what that's going to be like. And so they're adults, they're valid, they're well informed, they're terminally ill. They're terminally ill, and they have to have not only the primary, but the consulting physician. They also have to have a mental health evaluation to confirm that they are mentally capable. If they have a guardian, this is not a decision a guardian can make. If somebody's so incapacitated that they have a guardian, this procedure is not available to them. This has to be an adult making their own decision. And it also, there's a lot of protocol to make sure it's not a coerced decision. It's witnessed by various people who are not interested in the estate or not interested, they're not paying the medical bills and so forth. So that we want to really be sure that the person is making this decision voluntarily without coercion. And so it's actually sort of a rifle shot thing. I mean, it speaks to a different set of experience that my father had. I mean, it doesn't speak to the experience of decline and indignity, lack of mobility. Those are not part of the decisions that will be affected by this bill in the legislature. What it's about is, are you about to die? Now, one of the things my father did was he after he retired as a psychiatrist, he went to work in taking care of people in hospice care. And I think what motivated him especially was realizing that a lot of people who are in their final days, who are known to be dying perhaps of cancer, experience a lot of fear about what the death is going to be like. Are they going to go through a period of enormous pain? And again, they have to have that cancer to be eligible for this. But what my father always felt about this legislation was it was sort of a way to give people comfort that they knew they had a way out, that if they were going through tremendous suffering in their final few weeks, they could break the glass and exit, metaphorically. So my father was, as a physician, chose to get active in the medical society, because in the previous decade, the medical society had been opposed to this legislation. By the way, one of the features of this legislation is that the doctor doesn't have to do this. They can opt out of this and refer their patient to somebody else. So there's a lot of respect for the voluntary nature of it. But in the previous decade, in 2012, the medical society was opposed to this legislation. It was placed on the ballot people placed this question on the ballot in 2012, and it was defeated in a fairly close vote. And the Medical Society was one of the people that were against it. So my father said, well, hey, let's kind of take a poll of your membership, because he concluded that the leadership of the society might be out of touch with the membership of the Medical Society, Massachusetts Medical Society. And what he found out as a result of that was actually they did the survey, and there was a huge diversity of views among physicians on this issue. So they switched from being opposed to neutral. The legislation has been filed and refiled over the past 5 sessions now. Is that 5 or 6 sessions since 2012? So it would be 13, 15, 17, 19, 21, 23. I guess it's been filed again for the 6th time. I filed it myself a number of times. It was fun to work on with my dad. And he came and testified in favor, and his testimony was well received. As I'm president pro tem of the Senate now, so Joanne Comerford is the chair of the Public Health Committee, or I guess has been, and she's leading on this, and so I'm really glad to support her. I can tell you that the legislation definitely has strong support in the Senate. I believe that if we can get this bill to the floor, it will pass. Senator Comerford, who's from Western Mass, represents Northampton, the whole UMass area, and Senator Sue Moran, represents the Cape, not the outer Cape, but the inner Cape, sort of Falmouth and mainland cities like Plymouth. She's a strong supporter as well. So the 3 of us last year kind of polled all of our colleagues, and as I say, would have a very strong majority support in the Senate. We didn't bring it to the floor last year because we knew that it wasn't going to move in the House. There was strong signals sent by the Speaker of the House that I don't know how my members feel about this, and I think I'm not sure whether they've moved enough to be ready to do it, but my hope is that we will get it to the floor early in the session and be able to put it out there as something that has Senate support, and if we get it out there, show it has Senate support, then it'll be on the House to consider it, and we can take it from there. That is my presentation. I'm happy to stop there and happy to take questions.
And there are some questions here for you. I'm going to go in reverse order here. This last question, the death with dignity legislation has been introduced each year, at least since 2012, but has always died in committee. What do we need to do to finally get this legislation enacted?
Well, as I say, I think that's right. I actually think we did get it out of committee in the last 1 or 2 sessions. It just never actually got to the floor. I mean, I suppose that's a technical distinction or distinction without a difference. But this bill has had committee support, has come out of committee. We just have to, once a bill comes out of the primary committee, the Public Health Committee, then it goes to some kind of holding committee, and it's a decision of the Senate President or the Speaker whether they're going to bring it to the floor or not. The opposition to this, I think, really turns on people who are concerned that decisions would be made on a quality of life basis. That somebody would decide they're unacceptably disabled, or somebody would be depressed about their disability and would make this decision. That is not possible under this legislation. This does not speak to someone who's experiencing a slow decline from Parkinson's or a stroke or something else. It's not what this does. This is only for people that are terminally ill. And so I've had to explain that again and again to, I've got some dear friends in the disability community that are worried about this. And I emphasize again and again, this bill is not about disability. It is not. It is only about terminal illness. So I think that message is getting across. I think people understand what this bill does. And just to emphasize again, I guess maybe one thing I didn't say is, after all of this process and all this ascertainment that the person is terminally ill, mentally capable, voluntarily making a decision, all they do is get the drugs. Then it's up to them to take them, and they don't have to take them in the presence of a physician. In fact, there's language in there to say, please don't take them in a public place, and if you take them in a public place, we're going to send you the bill. So there's one of the features of it. So it remains entirely voluntary, but only for people who are terminally ill. So
here,
I think in terms of, to answer the question, what do we do? I intend to do this in the Senate. I think we can. I think if you live in a district that's other than mine, then you might have a senator. I think it's got good support in the Senate. I think all my abutting senators, anybody who's on this call likely has a senator that supports this bill. I don't think there's anybody near me, adjacent to me that doesn't support the bill. So I don't think there's anything you have to do. I think we will try to do this term in the Senate, and then maybe talk to your House member.
okay. So we'll get back to legislation in a bit, but there's a question here. What if a terminally ill person is mentally capable and conveys a want to die, it quickly becomes mentally incapable before this can be supported?
Oof. That's a really interesting question. So the person's capable, goes through all of the steps while they're capable, receives the medication. At that point, I don't know that there's a provision to take it away from them if they subsequently become somehow incapable. But in their state of capacity, they made a decision. I don't think that anybody could give it to them, force, decide on their behalf to take, that they should take it. That would be murder. This is only for capable adults. This procedure is only for capable adults.
And does the individual have to be able to administer the medication themselves?
That's a subtle question, and I don't think the bill, can somebody hand them the pills or tuck them in the mouth that give you a glass of water? I think that's kind of between the person and their people. That's not spoken to.
Okay.
Once they have the medication, it's out of the system's hands. It's in their hands.
Okay, here's a question. Thank you, Senator. With this legislation, is this the best we can do in the sense it is only for people who are terminally ill? I understand why this may be supported, but I do worry about those like the woman's story who had Alzheimer's or Judy's husband who had Parkinson's. Is this legislation a beginning trend that we can add to?
Well, I think the answer to that I have to give is no. I mean, it's not a beginning trend, because I'm not sure people will vote for something they think is on a slippery slope. And I don't really think it is, because I think there are extremely difficult issues once you get into the question of people who are not happy with their quality of life. I mean, that could happen at any age and as a result of any combination of things. And do we want to, somebody who just, to be or not to be, at 26, with a little medication could be fine with life. State is not anywhere close to embracing the idea that we're actually going to solve Judy's husband's problem. Fortunately or unfortunately, that's not what's on the table or likely to come on the table anytime soon.
How about religious institutions that are opposed and lobbying against it? Is there a division among religious groups?
Well, I mean, I think the Catholic Church has been very firmly opposed to this. Its emphasis on life, and life is something that's God-given and for God to take away. That outlook is something that has been strong in opposition to this. I think that's part of why you'd have such difficulty taking it to another place. I mean, I think a lot of people who might be supportive of this really wouldn't be supportive of the other.
Okay, there was a question early on. How does our legislation compare with other states?
Oh, I forgive me. I am not up to date on the latest. I think that there's only a couple other states that have done this, but I can't give you a 50-state rundown. Sorry. I mean, I'd like to be able to tell you that there's 6 or 7 or whatever the number is, but I don't have that stat. Maybe Judy does. Judy's got is on mute, but
Okay,
Unmute yourself, Judy.
There are 10 states and the District of Columbia which allow death with dignity, but they all have slightly different, rules, et cetera. But to me, one of the most interesting things that happened recently was that the state of Vermont does have such a law, but you must establish residency. And a woman in the state of Connecticut, where they do not have such a law, sued the state of Vermont, and she was allowed to go there and end her life there with help. So I think, it's such a personal thing. And as I said probably before, I respect anybody in the world who doesn't believe in this, but please don't let me not believe in it. Please don't let me not do it.
okay.
Thanks.
And perhaps there's a question here that has come up before, but is the terminal diagnosis relevant only without treatment? Or if treatment would prolong someone's life, does that disqualify them?
I believe it does, and I'm going to pull up the language because I think the diagnosis has to be you're going to die within 6 months with or without treatment. And by the way, I'll throw this in the chat. What is the definition of terminally ill? Got this right here. Bear with me one more second as I flip through these pages. Yeah, being terminally ill, having a terminal illness or condition which can reasonably expected to cause death within 6 months, whether or not treatment is provided.
Mm-hmm.
So you have no hope. That is, you have no hope of life after 6 months. No reasonable hope of life after 6 months is again, for better for worse, the only circumstance in which this legislation applies. I'm going to.
Okay, there are a few other questions, but I think we've covered a lot of them. A lot of it, there are a couple of questions about, what is it like to die, or what do the medications, drugs do? And I don't know that we want to get into all of that. Any final questions? One new message here. Let me just check and see. Okay, I think that's unless somebody has anything new to add, I think we pretty much have covered the questions.
And I am just dropping the language of the bill into the chat, or a link to the language of the bill into the chat. And by this way, this is a link which you could use to follow the status of the bill if you wanted to. But let me also underline that I am extremely happy to take anybody's questions about this at any time. My office is, this is one of the bills that we're following closely. So I've also put the link to my website contact page there in the chat. So anybody can always reach me to get an update, or, I can help run down any more detailed questions.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Um,
It's Debbie.
Yeah.
So, I put it in, but it got scrolled up. So if I'm thinking of a hospice doctor friend who recently said that it's very actually hard sometimes to predict how long people will live. So if somebody is given the medication and they don't take it within the first 6 months, presumably, are they allowed to keep it and they're still alive at the end of 6 months?
I don't think the bill has any mechanisms to take back medication. The person can always say they don't want to use it, and they can always take it away themselves or give it away. I mean, dispose of it, give it back to the pharmacy or the physician, or dispose of it in an authorized way. But there's no mechanism to police whether they've taken it or whether they've died.
Thank you.
Okay. So Jackie, I think we're going to go back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Will, for shedding light on all of that and for being with us tonight. If we could get the slides back. I did want to make a comment pertinent to that last question. One of the things I've seen in the research is that a lot of people go through the whole process and get the medication and never use it. It's basically so comforting to know that people do have that control. And so I want to move on and talk about, we always in these sessions, we have to raise the questions of who we are talking about. And Will was pointing out some of that as we were going through that. Who does and who doesn't have access to death with dignity? And there's some concern that it is just for privileged white people. But a major study actually found that the attitudes toward physician-assisted death in a study of a multi-ethnic group in Hawaii and California found that the major influences were religious and spiritual views and age, not ethnicity or gender. And in the next slide, we know that in the next slide, race and religion do impact views on this kind of legislation. Compared with most whites, African-American Protestants and Latinx Catholics are less likely to agree that this kind of physician-assisted death is morally acceptable. And among whites, less than 50% of evangelicals find it to be so, and even then, only in extreme cases. Excuse me. There's another area of concern that Will also raise is the issue of people with disabilities. Many bodies in our society are undervalued and devalued, and this is especially true of bodies with disabilities. And sometimes the devaluation is subtle, and sometimes it's overt. And this happens when there's a news item, for example, of a murder-suicide, where an able-bodied parent has killed their disabled child and then themselves. The empathy goes to the burdened parent rather than for the victim. And in movies, there are movies that reflect this problem. Me Before You, for example, and $1 Million Baby. Whose life is it anyway? These narratives, according to this author, put forward the idea of the right to die for someone with a serious physical incapacity, that this person is less worthy of life. In considering autonomy and self-determination, though, when it comes to the right to die, it's important to also say that anyone with a serious disability may also want to have access to a good death, but also a good life. And as we noted from research in the last session, some people worry about being urged to end their lives for the convenience of others. This is a worry that people with disabilities do carry with them, and also older adults whose lives have become difficult for caregivers. For this reason, many advocates for the differently abled bodies and older adults do not support death with dignity legislation. And as I was saying to my colleagues earlier this evening, I did have very smart, liberal professional colleagues at Boston College who felt very strongly against legislation like this on behalf of older people who they felt would be urged to end their lives to stop being a burden to their family. But it's important to remember, and this is what Will was pointing out, that these laws don't impact those who don't want it. No one is compelled to do it. Along the whole line, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, nobody is compelled to provide this. It only impacts those who do want it and who do want to be involved in it. And furthermore, it's only available to people with a terminal diagnosis of 6 months. And that's again what Will was pointing out. And this is an important reminder. In a combined 40 years of practice across jurisdictions that do authorize medical aid in dying, there has not been a single case of abuse or coercion or any criminal or disciplinary charges filed, not one. And this is found in a Compassion and Choices website, if you are interested in the 9 facts there. There's been a lot that we've covered tonight, hearing from our guest speakers and from the questions and answers, learning not only about medical aid in dying, but other options to hasten death, such as voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. It's not only information, but information with an emotional valence. I think we saw that in some of the questions that were raised. So I'd like to take a moment and ask you to reflect what might lead me to consider or not consider medical aid in dying for myself, and what are my reactions to the possibility of voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And a very important question in considering all of this is, how would my loved ones react to any of these kinds of decisions? I would be willing to take a few comments on these questions if anybody is willing to share. If we could unmute Lillian.
Individuals can do that themselves. They can unmute. And do you want to go into breakout rooms or not?
Well, we have time to.
Yeah.
All right. Sam, can you put us into breakout groups?
No, I'm going to do that, Jackie. And I'm
okay.
doing it right now.
Can you explain it then?
I can't explain it while I'm doing it, but
all right, we're going to break into groups of maybe 8 people and consider these questions, and feel free to share what you're willing to share, and pass if you don't feel comfortable talking about it. And we will come back, and if we have time, we'll share some of the we will put the questions, Eloise, in the screen. Sam can do that for us.
yeah, I'm gonna put people into 6 breakout rooms, and we can see how that works. Okay, so
This is great. I didn't think we would have time for this, so I'm a little
Yeah.
unprepared, but I think this is going to work great.
No, I think this is good. So I'm going to just put everybody in those breakout rooms. And
I have a question, Jackie, while Lillian's doing that. Do you understand the difference between people using morphine? Because, when you administer morphine to people, it also sedates people. In essence, it's almost a way of letting someone die when you're sedating with morphine.
Yeah, that was what we talked about with the palliative medication earlier. That's exactly what it is, morphine.
So you're allowed to administer morphine to an extent that someone can choose to say, just keep on giving me morphine, which it isn't just take away pain, it ends up leading to death. So that's seen as acceptable. I mean, I don't know how that's viewed.
It is considered acceptable. It's usually when the patient is very near death and in pain, and all efforts have been exhausted to reduce the pain and make the person comfortable. It is about making someone comfortable so that they can die more easily and more pain and less painfully.
Okay.
Can I respond to that,
It's called
Jackie?
terminal sedation for that reason.
Right. Okay. I said, no, when you're allowed to begin terminal sedation as to
Well,
it's the level pain.
That's usually a decision that a doctor and a hospice nurse makes.
Okay.
Could I
got it.
respond to that, Jackie? Could I respond to that for 1 second?
I'm sorry.
I'm asking if I could respond to that question about morphine, because I do have some answers about that.
That's Judy.
Go ahead, Judy.
It is the policy of hospice to make absolutely sure that you do not have enough morphine in the house to take it and to end your death, end your life that way. It is very, very, I mean, of course, people say, oh, if I could just, accumulate the right kind of pillows over my lifetime, that would be very easy, but it is not easy to do if you are under the care of hospice. They will not help you die. They will just make you more comfortable.
Well, okay. All right, let's go
Are
into.
we ready to open the rooms?
It's a really good note to end on because it is, as we started tonight, talking about owning our dying, that is one of the best examples. Thank you so much to Judy and to Will for being here tonight. Sam, could I get my slides back, please?
Yeah.
So, so this is my thank you to everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all of you for your responsiveness and for your thoughtful questions. And if I, at this point in the session, I usually tell you what's next. This time I'm going to say stay tuned because we have more sessions starting in the fall. We are interested in your ideas for those, Judy, and I mean, Lillian and Susan and I are going to meet in the next week or so to develop some ideas. So stay tuned, and we will be in touch with you about what will be happening in the fall. I want to close by saying that, you know, this has been a heavy discussion tonight, a lot of emotional issues. So I wanted to make sure that I leave you with a little bit of humor. If I could see the next slide. Good night,
Great.
everybody. Thank you so much.